Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar on supporting joiner, mover, leaver processes across UK government and civil service. During the next roughly 90 minutes, we're going to walk through a variety of JML related topics from inbound provisioning and lifecycle workflows to governing external permissions. The aim for this session is to hopefully demonstrate how more efficient management of JML processes can not only bring increased business efficiency, but also do good things like reduce attack surface and lower recurring costs. We are joined today by two highly experienced security specialists. Thank you again to everyone who's joined us. I appreciate you're all very busy and thank you for taking the time. I think we're all set for an insightful session. Some basic housekeeping. If you do have any questions as we go along, do not panic. We won't move on and forget about you. Time has been left at the end of the session for Q&A, so drop your questions into chat, and my colleagues Lucy and James and I will make sure to get to them all at the end. Without any further ado, I'm delighted to be joined by our very own Matt Fernandez. Matt has over 15 years experience as a Microsoft certified solutions architect, the last 7 of which he spent specializing in IAM security, architecture and governance. He is a specialist in all things Microsoft Entra, leading some of the very first deployments of IDGov in the wild, and works closely with the Entra UK go-to-market team. Joining Matt, we are very lucky to have Chris Howitt here with us today, who's security and compliance technical specialist at Microsoft Security. Chris has spent the last 2 decades in IT, the last 6 and a bit more specifically working to solve complex challenges across the public sector. Thank you for joining us today, Chris. Great to have your experience around Microsoft identity and cloud security.
Thank you.
Lastly, I'm Cameron Bell. I've spent the last 15 years setting up cybersecurity companies and innovation programs for UK government and defence. I now head up the commercial function for government and defence at Condatis, and it's a pleasure to be here today hosting today's webinar. Before I let Matt and Chris take over, a little background about Condatis. We're now, I think, 55 as of today, unashamed identity geeks, specializing quite uniquely only in identity and access management. The company is headquartered in Edinburgh, Scotland, with our team spread geographically all across the UK. We're Microsoft partners, and in 2022, we won a Microsoft Engineering Airlift Award for Partner Excellence related to our work in decentralized identity. We have also augmented the Microsoft Entra product offering by developing our Condatis Credential Gateway, which is in large-scale real-world use today, enabling Entra to be used to manage identity and access across non-Microsoft ecosystems. As you can see here, we work across a range of verticals for a broad variety of customers with complex IAM requirements, but around 70% of our active engagements are for clients in government and public services. Oh, forgive me. There was always a high chance with a dyspraxic in charge that we were going to get a slide error. So if that's our only one, I'll be delighted. As I was saying, about 70% of our work is for clients in government and public services. These range from the UK Department for Work and Pensions, UK Hydrographic Office at the MOD, DEFRA, as well as critical national infrastructure providers such as Sellafield, a relevant use case which I will touch on a little bit more later. In terms of our history as a company, we've been fortunate to have sort of grown up alongside the current Microsoft Entra Identity Suite. Back in 2016, Condatis delivered the first ever UK deployment of what was then the Azure Active Directory B2C for Nuffield Health. And more recently, our close involvement with the development of Entra Verified IDs led to another first, this time with the nation-scale deployment of Verified ID as part of the NHS Digital Staff Passport. In short, Condatis are recognized identity experts developing IAM solutions for some of the world's largest estates, and we have a deep understanding of all things Microsoft Entra. And with that, thanks for hanging in there through the sales blurb, and I'm delighted to hand over to Chris.
Hi there. So I'm just going to share my screen this time. People should hopefully get a lovely white, just a white screen to start off with. Has everyone got that? Just before I start waffling on.
Looks like it. Yep.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so as we start talking about the JML process, just going to dive in, just going to give a few concepts to start off with, and then quite a big scary diagram to kind of explain how this kind of stuff ties together. So as I said, as Cameron mentioned, I've been working in public sector for over 6 years while being in Microsoft as well, and I've been seeing a lot of issues. JML probably is the most common issue that I see across the board, and typically it's something that's organically grown, can be a very manual process as well, and quite difficult to deal with. Lots of time and effort is being put in by lots of different authorities and other public sector organisations trying to get this sorted out. But as I talk about this, I'm going to talk about this in terms of 4 A's of the JML process. And the first one's going to be automation, because that's what ultimately what I'm trying to achieve is automate as much as we can do. So that means, rather than having a manual process to kick something off, there might need to be a trigger, but at least have a workflow or some other automation that does a lot more process and have it less human intervention on that side. But ultimately, you're never ever going to be able to fully automate the JML process. There always has to be another element in there. And working in public sector is especially true because it's seldom the case that one person has just the one role. I was working with another council. They've got 4,500 users, but 2,000 separate roles within the organisation because of all the different bits and pieces that they do, across the estate and the multiple hats that people wear. So where we can't automate, we then give autonomy. And autonomy is going to be one of the most important bits here as we start growing things out across the business. Now, an example that people might have, and I always seem to pick on the names Bob and Jane, don't ask why, they're just kind of stuck with me now. But let's say Bob joins the organization and Bob joins working in the finance department. So as Bob comes in, there'll be an automation that comes in to say, yep, Bob's in finance. We add the attributes and he gets added to various groups and bits and pieces as well. And he gets access to the finance services. And then Bob might then leave finance, say 3 or 4 years later, move into HR as an example. Depends on the nature of his role and what he does. So the automation kicks in, and Bob gets removed out of finance and added into HR. And then the help desk lights up, and Bob goes, "No, I still need access to the finance system because I'm doing this handover." So then a manual override needs to go into onto any kind of automation you might have in place there. And with that, Bob now has access to finance and HR, and there's probably a very good chance that your IT or whoever manages the system or manages the permissions is just not going to be told that Bob's now finished in finance completely and got into HR. So what we really want to do is start talking about this in terms of empires and kingdoms. So historically, IT has ruled the JML process, so to speak, as the empire, so to speak. So tried to spread their fingers far and wide and actually have full management on the process, take as much away from the end user, which yes is a good thing, but ultimately the end user needs to be involved for approvals and things like that anyway to get into that workflow. And it tends to be very big, very complex processes that are inherently very fragile as well. So again, just the example I gave is just an override, and they've already got a manual override in place. So if we can actually give some autonomy to this, we can say, well, actually, let's say Jane owns the finance resources. So as Bob joins the organization, she goes, yep, Jane gives access to it and goes, yep, I understand Bob's got that. And Jane's going to have the accountability to say, right, actually, with this, Bob, yes, I agree, Bob has access to the finance resources. Now, come to the end of Bob's term in finance, and as he starts transitioning into HR, rather than just having Bob being removed from finance automatically, we're going to have some attestation that can help with Jane's accountability so she can approve Bob with autonomy into finance and actually maintain his access into finance as well. So with that finance, as Bob goes to leave into HR, rather than his access from finance being automatically removed, Jane can perhaps get attestation, say every month, every quarter, how often you actually want to do this. It could be weekly, monthly, quarterly, half yearly, or yearly. It comes in and goes, right, does Bob still need to maintain access? Yes, Bob still needs to do access. He's doing his handover. A month later, Bob, have you finished the handover yet? No, I just need another week just to get the last little bits and pieces up and going. Right, I'll leave his access. The end of the next month, when the next attestation period comes round, yep, I'm done with that. I can now remove Bob from finance. It's all completely approved. IT have full control over this, but none the day-to-day running. So there's loads of controls and accountability that we can put into this. So automate as much as we can. Where we can't automate, we have autonomy. We have autonomy, we have accountability, and where we have accountability, so not only do we have attestation, so not only are people approved for access in the first place, they're also approved for maintaining access as well, which is the important part here. So how do we achieve all of this? So the first thing we're going to start talking about is what we call the inbound provisioning API. And this is one of the new things we've got in, and this is why Microsoft has started to talk a lot more about the JML process as well. And we have partners like Condatis actually helping us on this side. So the inbound provisioning API is, again, some new toys that we got in place. It's currently in public previews. You just need to be on E3 or Entra ID Premium P1 to be able to use it. And what it allows us to have is any version of truth of bringing people into the directory. So historically, it's been it's only if people in the HR system, and it's only then if the HR system actually supports some kind of controls or whatever else as well, what we want to bring in. And odds are the HR system probably just done spat out a change or something like that at some point, maybe in a CSV file or something like that as well, which then had to be manipulated for whatever else as well before it can then create a separate script or something to manually create users with a degree of automation. So what we can do with this inbound provisioning API now is it's now a SCIM endpoint. So that's an open source protocols for importing and creating users. So we can now have this API and we can take any version of truth and multiple versions of truth of who should be in your directory, because odds are there's never going to be one. So we could have, say, let's say your HR system comes in for one, and that could cover your full-time employees. You've got your payroll system, which then also includes your contractors. You might have just a CSV file, which is a bunch of volunteers coming into the system. We might have an SQL table or something like that as well, that's doing a bunch of transforms and getting data into a way that we actually want it to do. And what we can then do from this inbound provisioning API is then either provision directly to on-prem or into Entra ID. And if we go to on-prem, we can then sync into Entra ID as well. And what we then have is the enticement management. And this is where we start talking about those kingdoms. And the enticement management determines what resources that kingdom belong to which kingdom. So we say in the finance, that could be a bunch of SharePoint sites, a bunch of cloud-based applications, but also on-premise applications and file shares and things like that as well. And all that can be brought into the enticement management. And then with that, we then have the lifecycle workflows, which are going to be bringing quite a large degree of automation into this. And again, this is a new feature that we've just got brought out as well. And then finally, at the end of the lifecycle, the user is going to be removed. So as we bring this into play, what we now have with this inbound provisioning API is something we're going to be dubbing the universal connector. So currently, this will sit as part of Entra Connect, basically. So which is the bit that does the synchronization from on-prem. So with this connector at the moment, it basically allows for a bi-directional sync of data. So not only can we take this from the inbound provisioning API and say we want to provision a user either directly into Active Directory or directly into Entra ID. And again, we can have multiple APIs. So we could have this one does directly to Entra, this one does exactly to Active Directory. There may be another one that goes to Active Directory that's got different rules, etc. as well. So as a user gets provisioned, we will start doing some manipulations on them to say, okay, well, we'll take the CSV file, we'll convert it into something that the API understands, and we can automate that, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a moment. Once we've then got that, we can then say, actually, we write whatever we have from the CSV file into an attribute on-prem, and we then might do another transform to say, right, actually, an attribute that's written into, say, a custom extension can then be written into a separate Entra ID attribute in the cloud. So you can mix and match and change and do to your heart's content. And again, I'll show you what that looks like. Once we then have that in place, we can then start saying with the entitlement management, we can then start adding in the roles and features to go with that. It is also worth pointing out, just as another bit in here, this on-premise connector allows us to actually write back from Entra ID. So we could have a group or group ideally that's maybe created on-prem that can be synchronized into Entra ID. We can then actually make that group be assigned to privilege in Entra ID, or we can actually say it can be managed by privileged identity management. So it might not have privilege in Entra ID, but it can say, right, actually the group ownership or group membership can be managed in Entra, and that can then be written back on-prem. So we can actually now start using via these connectors and this kind of configuration to say, well, actually, if I update a user here, they now get privilege here. They get member of a group here, which then might have additional privilege down here. So we can start using cloud-based services and all the goodness of PIM and other services as well to manage on-premise Active Directory rather than having it being a one-way sync historically and only coming from on-prem to the cloud. So we can start going back the other way. Now, there are some caveats and the bits and pieces to work around that. And if you engage with a partner like Condatis as well, they can help you understand those caveats and what's in and out of that and how to get all this working as well. But so once we've got this entitlement package, as I said, we can now start grouping objects into that. So the SharePoint site, we could have, there could be an owner of one site, a visitor in another, a member in another. They could be an owner in a group, or whatever else as well, or member of a group. Depending on the SaaS application as well, we'll be able to do some provisioning into that application. So it might be they just got access to the application. It could be that they've actually got a role within that application. And that is very much down to the individual app and what that then supports. But we can also bring things from on-prem as well. And with that, we can have the Entra app proxy that allows us to publish an on-premise 443 application and put that through the cloud. And then with Entra Private Access, we can actually publish any application. And there's some changes in here. Currently, it's TCP only at the moment. In closed private previews at the moment, we do cover TCP and private DNS, so that's coming down the line. So we can actually have any application we want that can then be pulled into this entitlement package. And with that entitlement package, we will then have the access review. So we're now talking about that autonomy, accountability, and attestation to say, yes, can Bob have access to the finance package or the entitlement package that we got here? So with that, it could be Jane that says, yes, I agree that Bob does that, and she does it in a timely fashion. And if she doesn't respond in a timely fashion, you have the option to say, yeah, kick her out or do whatever else as well. And we can take a look at that later on. But also with the access reviews, we can say, yes, I agree this has access, or actually, I don't know why Bob is asking access for this. Who is Bob? I don't know him yet. So I can request that attestation and go and ask for that and say, right, Bob, why do you need access to this resource? Who are you? What do you do? Can you back this up with a service ticket number or something along those kind of lines to actually legitimize his claim? And what we can then also do is user to group affiliation. So we can say, actually, Bob sits in this side of the org chart. Let's say, talking about an authority, you could have finance on one side of the org chart and social workers on the other side of the org chart. And if somebody from the social work starts saying, I want access to this finance package, we can go, actually, as no one from social workers on that side, their management and that side actually has access to any of the finance resources. So that's completely out of pattern behavior. Note, we're going to have a low affiliation with that. And then we can request that attestation and say, well, why do you need access? Because this isn't normal. And we can have other approvals, such as the user hasn't signed in for a period of time, etc., as well, to make sure, well, actually, do we want to maintain this access, or do we want to grant it in the first place? And if we have granted it, do we want to maintain it? Now, once we've got those access reviews in place, we can then have a degree of automation that kicks in. So we could say, let's say the user gets created, it gets provisioned, I should say. So the object is being created, maybe created on-prem, synchronized up to the cloud. And then what we'd have in Entra ID is we've actually got the attributes of employee hire date and employee leave date. So we can actually take that as timers, and there'll be more that we'll do. There's more triggers that are going to come on board. But we can say on the like 8 days before they start, let's actually provision the user, add them into a group, and as they add into a group, they get a license. And as they get the license, their mailbox gets spun up and all the rest as well, and all that can be completely automated. So let's say that's 8 days before they join the organization. Now, 7 days before they join the organization, we can now start sending them some user communications, like here's your onboarding package, here's all the information you need, click here to find the information, whatever else as well. We can also say, well, actually, let's actually request access to the entitlement package. So we could say, right, depending if it's needed or not, if approvals required, we can say, right, 7 days before they join, let's ask Jane for approval for Bob to have access to the finance package, as that example on there. Now, there might be other packages that don't require approval, such as here's access to the company resources, such as this is the annual leave policy, this is the expenses policy, whatever else it might be, and more common information you just need to be an employee to be able to access. And then what we can do, say, at the same time as well, we can also trigger off a custom extension. So this would be effectively, it's not like a Logic app, it is an Azure Logic app. And that can potentially trigger into Azure integration services and basically does anything that a Logic app can do, which is pretty much anything. So we can say, actually, I want you to start a task in the ITSM tool, such as ServiceNow or something like that as well, and say, right, this person needs a laptop. So let's spawn them up a laptop. And as you spawn them up a laptop, let's capture all the the serial numbers and all that kind of good stuff as well. So we can now associate what the physical user has and the physical items that they might have with the digital identity. So we could say at the same time, yep, generate a physical badge to get inside the building, to spawn up a telephone number if they need one on their desk, get the stationery organized for them, whatever else it might be. And we can pivot all of that into the integration services. We can then say, right, one day before they join the organization, let's give all the information to the manager and remind them of the onboarding processes and all that kind of good stuff. On the day the user joins the organization, let's generate a temporary access password for them and give that to their manager. So the manager then has a phone call with them, or has some other arrangement to get that password out to the end user. The end user signs in with the new credentials. A temporary access password is seen as an MFA sign-in. They now have access to enroll into MFA and enroll into self-service password reset, set their own credentials, which all gets written back on-prem, and the user now has access to everything they need access to. And all of this is a degree of automation, but with that accountability and approvals to go into that side of things as well. So lots and lots going on that side as well. So to give you, what we'll then have for, say, like the movers processes and things like that as well. And there might be more manually triggered to say, okay, this user's leaving a department or joining a department. And you can then have all those processes just spun up to say, yes, I want to initiate it. Of course, the other thing that can trigger the inbound provisioning API could be a logic app or Power Automate or Power App or something like that as well. So you could say, well, this user is remarried and they're changing their name. Great, so we're going to go through a logic app, have all the workflows in that, sorry, in the Power App, sorry, and have all the workflows to go with that to say, yes, I agree, this user's changing their name, they're updating their mobile phone number, I'm requesting a new user, whatever else it might be, and here's the form I need to fill in to make sure I've got the bare minimum credentials, etc. That can then all feed in and start triggering off these processes. So we can then say, when this is based on the user joining the organization, we'll have one workflow that goes, this is the one for finance people. We'll have another one that's for HR people, something along those kind of lines. So yeah, before I go into any demos and show this off, is there any questions there? Just wanted to double check. Has anything appeared in the chat yet?
Nothing in the chat yet, no.
Yeah, no, if anyone does have any questions, do feel free to add questions to the chat. And if people do want to ask a question as well at the right time, put your hand up and we can take you off mute. And if you want to ask a question to the crowd as well. Okay. But if there isn't any questions, I will go on straight into demo, basically. So yeah, I got Gareth, we'll just take you off mute there. Yeah, so you can unmute yourself now. What's your question?
I got a question around which bits are native and which bits are separate products or non-native, if you like.
I'll do the nice blatant diagram just to highlight what's what in what licensing. Is that clear?
That's exactly what I want. It's perfect.
Okay. Oh yes, we'll share the slide deck as well to have this information. But effectively, the bits in black with the E3, as I suggested, E3, E5. The bits in green in the new identity governance SKU, and the bits in purple here with the EPA, that's Entra Private Access. That is entirely optional. That is not mandatory for the joiners, movers, leavers process, but that just allows you to add more resources into the entitlement package. So we can have things like a share. So we can publish, say, like port 445 on a Pacific SMB share, a Pacific path, obviously, or an IP address, and that can then be like a file share or something that they then have access to in the entitlement package. So lots of good controls to go into that as well. What's the support for self-service application requests? So with that, as I said, we can to have an application added in, or so just for clarification, is that for an app to be added in, or is that for access to an application? So to add a new application. So yeah, it's just take you off mute here as well. Yep. So you can unmute yourself now. I don't think we can hear you yet, Andrew.
Sorry, I didn't have my headset on, so I don't
there
think
we
I've
go.
got a mic connected with that. Yeah, it's for where we've got an application catalog and we want to give the ability for users to request and potentially have a workflow behind it, depending on, whether it's, if it's a pre-application, it's probably fine. But if it's a application that requires a license or has access to privileged information, we might want a workflow where a manager or application owner might need to approve it.
Yeah, so again, we could do things via Power Automate, which then creates the trigger to kick off the workflow, if that makes sense. And I'll leave some of that to Condatis to be able to talk about that in a little bit more detail later on, or maybe follow up with that question at the end, because that could be quite a long answer as well.
Thanks.
But yeah, okay, cool. With that, as I said, I'll go into demo, and then I'll hand over to Condatis at that point as well. So going into this, what we've got, going to talk about this inbound provisioning API is what I want to demonstrate. So what I can do is I can go to a new application, and if I search for API-driven, that will give me the inbound provisioning to Entra ID, and then there's a one to Active Directory as well. And in truest Blue Peter fashion, here's one I've created earlier. So this is one that generates to on-prem, and has a point of that. So as I go into this and go into the provisioning, and this is where you'll spend most of the time. So once you've got your permission set up for this, and a lot of this is covered in guides, and of course our partners can also help support you getting this in place, is with this technical information, where you'll see I've actually got my API endpoint. And again, as you can see, there's a unique GUID that goes into that endpoint as well. And I can have as many of these as I like inside the organization, or inside my tenant. And then they can have the provisioning that goes with that. So as I take a look at the provisioning here, I've got my mappings. So I can say, right, these are the as it comes up. So it's just as it renders. These are the mappings I'll have to say, right, this is my on-premise attribute, and this is my API attribute. So this is basically the SCIM endpoint that I've got on here. So this is basically, as I make up this attribute from what I'm getting from my SCIM input, I can then say, yeah, replace join with an @ symbol, and I've got their username and suffix and last name and things like that as well. So I can generate and make things as I need to match my requirements. And that then kicks out to the mail attribute on-prem. And then I can add my own mappings and put my own controls in place of that as well, and support that. So I can also then control what attributes I have on-prem, what maps where, what are my primary attributes, what ones do I need to have in place. Can I have my own custom attributes if I wanted to as well? All of that kind of good stuff can be put in place here. This will take a moment to render. So I'm just going to go back out of this one, because it may not last long enough actually. So yeah, just going to refresh the page, because actually my fault, should have opened out the demo, because it always takes a little while to open. So just going to go back on that side, and just bear with me for one moment. So this is why I always do it, because it takes a little while. And so the demo gods, I wasn't listening to the demo gods today. I'm on that side. So if I just go back into the portal just to show that, because I shouldn't have opened that on the page. It does work. It just takes forever to open to be able to do that mapping as well. So once I've actually got this, and I've got my applications here, and I've got my provisioning, I can choose, as I said, what goes where, and got those kind of controls that go with it. Now, what we can then do is have something that can call upon that API endpoint. So because it's a SCIM endpoint, as I said, it's an open source connector. Well, I use open source protocols, or I should say. With that, we can have the HR system, if it supports it, talk directly to that connector. And there is a chance, depending on what the HR system supports, it might even be able to write back as well. But in my case, what I've chosen to do is actually use a CSV file. So what I've created in my Azure environment here is I've created a Azure file storage, and I've dumped a CSV file that contains 5 usernames in that, and all the configurations and attributes and all the rest I want to put in there. I've then wrapped that Azure file storage with around a container, and that container's got a SFTP file server, so I can upload and manipulate and change and do what I want to in that file storage, and have another system call upon that to actually automate the updating of those CSV files, etc. as well. What I've also got in that container is a CSV to JSON converter. The whole lot of this I just got off GitHub. So in our guides and all the rest as well, if you want a little play with this, there's a little one button adds to say, right, add this to my Azure environment, and it'll configure everything you need to. You just add in your own attributes or your own configuration, and with that, it will spool up pretty quickly to get that in place. But what this is basically doing is it's getting the file path from my file share. So it's then digging that out. it's parsing the CSV files, converting those to JSON, converting all to JSON, and as it then goes through to initialize that, it's then constructing my user. So this is just a demo of what it can do. I could also have a use something like Azure CLI as well to actually say, actually, I just want to ingest this straight to the endpoint. So I can actually do straight from the command line, straight to the inbound provisioning API. So as a parses like look through a CSV file or something again, that can provision all the users and create them automatically as well. So once I've then got that, that will then spit out the user and actually put them into create the user, create all the JSON, etc. as well, and then actually just spit them out into my Active Directory. So if I take a look at this on my server behind here, so this is my on-premise domain controller. Oh, don't want the wrong one. Don't want to turn it off. So this is my on-premise domain controller. So just going to log into this. Just bear me for 1 second. Hopefully got the right password. As you can see for these users, I've just got my on-prem user within this OU within Active Directory. So this is my domain controller that I've got here. So if I just, so I got Teams has decided to put a mark over the top there, so I can't see. There you go. Just shrink that down. Then with the, as I actually trigger this this attribute to run. So trigger this logic app rather than say to run. So this is basically taking a CSV file, and I might have like a nightly output or something from my HR system. Depends on your churn and how regularly you want to get this updated. But this will read through. This example will take anything up to like 25, 30 seconds to do those 5 users, with the majority of the time actually trying to find the users, parsing it all and getting it in place. It's typically very, very quick. So what you should get when it's all done, with that, in this case, it only took 8 seconds. So if I go back to my domain controller and refresh that, you can see my 5 users have now been created. And that's then spat that out. So what I can now do is when AAD Connect kicks in, or say Entra ID Connect kicks in, that will then kick it out and take it into the lifecycle workflows. And with that, I will hand over to Condatis to talk about that side of things as well. Before we go any further, though, is there any questions before we head over to Condatis? Again, if anyone wants to put their hand up or anything like that as well to talk, or just put the question in the chat. Yeah, so Andrew, I think you still got the ability to come off mute as well, so yep. Can't hear you if you're talking.
Is that any better?
Yeah, that's better. I can hear you now. Yeah.
Sorry, I keep turning my headphones off so I can just I don't have to have them on the whole time, and then I come up with a question. Sorry. So is there a way to set up rules to move different categories of users to different OUs, or even apply different domains to email addresses?
Yes. So what that's done is in the provisioning. So as I take a look at the provisioning here, so this is for this connector. So I have as many of these API driven APIs as I need to, these endpoints as I need to. So this is just one that I've got in my demo tenant. You can just add again and add again and add again, and each time they'll each get their own separate API endpoint. And if you have different logic apps and different things that create the users, that will then call upon a different API endpoint. And within that, I will then have my my users and my settings here. So I could say these are the admin credentials. These are my default users for the OU, or the default OU. Those users get put in, and then said with that, I will then have the mappings, and I can then map different attributes to different needs. So we could have one that's for admins. So it could be we have a Andrew Christian that gets created, but it could also be an ex Andrew that gets created, or something like that as well, or admin Andrew, whatever you call it, that gets put into a separate API, a separate OU as well.
That's perfect. Thanks.
Yep, and so you do all of that in your mapping. So you take whatever you're taking the source from, you convert that into JSON, which is basically the SCIM language that it understands. So basically a SCIM attribute. You then map the SCIM attribute to say this is what I want it to be on-prem, or this is what I want it to be in Entra ID. And if you're going on-prem, you can then say, well, this attribute gets written into this SCIM attribute gets written into this Active Directory attribute. Then via Entra ID Connect, this Active Directory attribute can then be written into a different Entra ID attribute. So the example you might want to have is for the employee hire date, employee leave date. They are attributes in Entra ID, but they're not attributes on-prem. So you might need to write to a custom attribute and then map it up automatically. There's a one-off configuration, but then that'll be sorted out in the future. Okay,
Brilliant, thank you.
awesome. If there's no other questions, I'll just give that one more minute, and well, not even that, just see if there's any other questions that pop up. If not, I will hand over to Condatis to, yeah. I will leave that there then. Thank you very much. Any questions? I'll keep an eye on the chat.
Okie dokie. Another demo time. So Chris mentioned the inbound provisioning and the lifecycle workflows and the governance, and this is fantastic for internal member users that are going to exist in Active Directory or Entra ID. One thing that the inbound provisioning API can't handle right now is the creation of guest users. So we've done some work with customers who have, you know, a repository for guest users, contractors, partners, things like that, and they require access in the same way that member users do. And there's always challenges in onboarding and time to access, and it can often be more critical with guest users because that time to access costs money. So I want to show a little bit around how the new stuff within Entra and the ID governance can help the guest user lifecycle as part of the wider joiner mover leaver process, control that, get people access more efficiently, get people working quicker, saving time, and making it easier for people to work together without the constraints of so much red tape. So we're going to look at the lifecycle with the APIs, and I'm also going to show some of the newer stuff with Entra Verified ID, where perhaps you've got someone coming in from another organization accessing sensitive systems or sensitive areas, and you need to do additional checks above multi-factor, and you want to use the verified ID to verify that at the point in time that the person is accessing or being granted those access rights, they are who they say they are with an actual physical check. So how this works, this is a very kind of simplistic demo. So yes, I'm aware that almost every scenario you will come across will be more complicated than this, but this will demonstrate the technology and kind of give you a flavor of what can be done with it. So we start off with a laser pointer with our guest user source system. This can be, if they're in an HR system, this could be a text file, CSV, you name it. What's important though is that we can gather the attributes of that guest. This then gets pushed through to the guest user provisioning agent, and this is a little tool, be it a flow or a logic app, that communicates with the Entra APIs. So there's a couple of ways this can be done. This one is using the guest user API, and you can also use the entitle management API, and they support different functions. The reason why I'm using the guest API for this one is because of the user invites. So I want to show that a user is invited and they get a nice little welcome message. The entitle management API makes it easier to bypass some of those processes and just go straight into access packages, which can be good for different situations. So what this does, it pulls that information, it pushes that up into Entra and creates a guest user, and the status of that is kind of non-accepted. It's pending acceptance of the invitation. What the app then does is pull that information back from Entra ID and populate, using the Graph API, additional attributes that aren't supported by the guest. So we're talking like the start date, the leave date, stuff that's going to be used for the lifecycle workflows. All this can be done before the guest user accepts the invitation. So before they even have access to the system, their account can be picked up by the lifecycle workflows and have their entire onboarding stuff kind of prepped. So the triggers for before they start, X number of days before they start, can all be done. And so on day one, everything flows through, and they've got all the access they need with very little downtime. So let's actually have a look at this. We start off in our identity governance dashboard, and you can see the relatively poor hygiene of my demo tenant with 8 permanent global admins, which is way too many. We can also see very nicely at a glance how many users we've got, how many guests we've got, and some information around access reviews and lifecycle workflows to give you some basic information about the health of your tenant and how some of these governance workflows are functioning. But what we are interested in is giving someone access. So this is my wonderful guest user repository in the form of a Microsoft Forms. I'm asking for some very basic information: name, email address, what company they are, what type of employee they are, and this is useful for the workflows to categorize up roles or personas. Are they temporary staff? Are they cover? Are they contractor? Are important start and end dates, and then I'm just asking for the department as well. And these are used for automatic assignments for dynamic groups and things like that. So if I submit this, wonderful, thank you very much. All being well now, if I have a look in my all users and have a search for myself, providing my flow runs, there we go. I've been named with my company name at the end. I'm a guest user, and if we have a look in here, my invitation state is pending acceptance. So currently, I've got an account, it's a blank slate, I've got no access to anything. If I have a look in the properties down here, we can see my information has been populated and my hire date is in there, but you'll notice that the leave date is not shown here. And this is deliberate. It's a secure field. You can pull the information out through Graph to verify it's there, but this is to make it, because it's obvious it's sensitive information. You don't want to give people the heads up that their end date has been populated before the appropriate HR processes have been done. So that's deliberately hidden from the GUI and it is used in backend triggers. So because of the type of user I am, the guest that I am, I have used some lifecycle workflows. And these run on a schedule at the moment every hour. So I'm going to manually trigger a couple of these. But what will happen here, because this is an internal, my internal tenant, and I share this with some of my colleagues within Condatis, and I want them to be able to access and configure things and do stuff. I have a lifecycle workflow here, and this is a very basic one to say, if you are a guest user and your company name is Condatis, then I want you to do some things. And those things are make sure the guest account is enabled, send a welcome email to say, hey, cool, welcome to my tenant, and request an access package. Now, this one is specific to us internally, and it's a bit of a hammer to crack a nut, but I want to make sure that the other architects that are accessing my tenant have access to the things they need to be able to configure and view stuff. So we have a specific access package for internal staff, and it's set to auto approve. So as soon as this lifecycle workflow runs, I will have, or my guest account will have access to the permissions defined within that access package. That's very handy for situations like this where I want to be able to demo and reset and show other people things. As far as our guest is concerned, though, this is the end of their involvement with the admin. Right? Once that data has been pulled in and the thing's been created, now it goes straight over to user experience. So what happens on the user's end I'm sure some of you will have experienced some of these or seen some of these before. You receive this email from Entra to say, hey, you've been invited to this environment. Come along and join the party. Information about the tenant, and this is customizable. And again, you can disable it if you want. Let's make it look a bit prettier. So if I accept this now, this will change my user state into an active guest account. And that will, loading on the other screen, bring up a message to say, this is the permissions that this tenant would like to access your account. And you can drill down into these and say, okay, they want to look at my profile data, they want to collect my activity, and they want to use my profile data and activity. So, I mean, that's fine. That's logging, auditing, that's all standard stuff. So we'll accept that. And this brings me into the My Apps portal. And you'll see that Salesforce just vanished there because my previous demo has reset. So within here, within my actual tenant, this is populated full of apps. But because I'm now in the guest tenant, there's specific things that we want to see. And if I go to my access, yeah. Bear with me one moment. There's always some jiggery pokery with tenant switching when you're doing it with your live account. Okay, so within the My Access portal, this is a sister portal to the My Apps. We can see that I have a few access packages here that I can request. So I would like to access Salesforce, and I'm going to use this one because I know it's the verified ID demo. So we get a little warning to say, hey, you need to present the thing. In here, we can also see what resources that we're going to get access to. So this is the Salesforce, but because I'm accessing it as a system admin, I need to do an additional check. So I can continue on this, and I'm presented with a QR code. And by the magic of broadcasting, welcome to my mobile phone. And I'm going to need this slightly to the side. So if I point my camera up here now, see my screens, and we open that in Authenticator. Oh, helps if I actually look at my face. And now Authenticator is going to say, I have found that you have a verified credential within your Authenticator. Do you want to share this with the company that is requesting it? And if I want to, I can tap on this and show exactly what data is being shared. So name, email address, profile picture, that kind of thing. And if I close you down and press share, credential was successfully verified, and I can crack on with the rest of the request. So there's some choices here. I can specify when I want it to end, and stick some justification in. You can make these mandatory. I just haven't for the sake of the demo, which is great for audit logs. And again, you can also have approvals and things triggered on here. So even if you've got someone verifying their identity using this method, you can still chain those approvals together to make it fit your business process. So we submit this request, it's being processed, and then with any luck, very rapidly, I hope, it should be active. yeah, we've got a start date, an end date. I can choose to extend my access if I want to. I also receive an email to say that I now have access to this access package for 7 days. And with all the demo luck, we should have now in my apps. Oh, okay. We'll give that a couple of minutes. But as this works through now, we will see a Salesforce app pop up in here, and I'll have single sign-on access into that. Because Salesforce supports Skim, the moment I am added into the assignment for that, it provisions me into the application with the correct permissions. So for the time that I have been assigned that access package and those permissions, I will have access to that. And when that access package expires, my access into Salesforce will be revoked. So it's an excellent way of having that dynamic control of privileges, be it just standard user or as admin stuff. Let's see. Okay, cool. So if now me as a user, I'm reaching the end of my my contract or my guest access, and it's time for account tidy up, the lifecycle workflows can kick in to do specific things. And because we've entered the end date, the system knows when that time is going to be. And so if we have a look, I've got a few different named ones here. So our guest, it's going to be our offboard. Now, within here, our execute, I know it says retail, but it's not actually specified in our scope. I'm only worried about user types being guests, and the trigger is the day of their leave date time. Now, I'm not going to wait for a month for this to trigger. I'm going to run this on demand. But what this will do is disable the account, remove all of the access packages, and cancel any pending access packages. So if I've got some that are still waiting for approval, but my account's being terminated for whatever reason, this tidies up the whole system and makes sure that there's nothing left hanging on and people aren't confused about anything. What this then allows is for the account to hang around for a little bit, just in case it's required for anything. I mean, it can just be recreated, but sometimes you want that little bit of a grace period to stop that. So if we run this, oh, look, Salesforce has popped up. Promised it would. Promised it would. So if we find me again, it's Condatis, choose the right account, and we run this. I think this is one I prepared earlier. So while that's running, because we'll see some stuff happening, but you can click on the person and we get logs. So we've got users, we've got runs, we've got tasks. So if I look at the user, it's going to then break down the tasks that were done and what the outcome of that was if there are errors. Now, in all of these, you can set it to just cancel the workflow if an error has occurred, or you can have it so that it will continue on and do the other tasks and flag up when things don't happen. So in this instance now, my guest account should be disabled. And this one here, and we are. And I should also now not have any applications assigned to me. And this might take a little bit of time to catch up as it does to do the assignments, but because my account is disabled right now, I can't log in or do anything. And as a point of fact, refreshing the page where Salesforce was, is now broken because I'm trying to sign into a tenant that my guest account is disabled in, which is great. So while the system tidies itself up, you can be secure in the knowledge that the user doesn't actually have access to the things anymore. Further on from that, after a certain amount of time, we want the whole system to be tidied up. So that is why we have our guest number 4. And this is a really simple one. 30 days after their end date, delete them, because we can get rid of the guest mailbox. It's not deleting mailboxes. It's not, deleting data because everything's hosted in their tenant for that user. It's just removing their access and their entries for access. So again, we're going to specify that they're a guest. We're going to delete their account. And if I run this on demand against my account that we've just done this demo with, and run, and we have a look, delete user account completed, which means now the entry should be completely gone. Hey. And this is nice because it's a full 360 and it resets my demo back to the beginning, which I do appreciate. So what does this get you? This gets you easy access to onboarding guests, to managing guests through access packages, and controlling the offboarding of guests, because guest accounts are ones that we see most often just hanging around in the system, especially where system integrators are in play and there's lots of people constantly going in to manage the system. Their accounts just get left there just in case. And this is a great way of being able to tidy that up and having short-term access to specific things. The access packages themselves are very configurable to any connected system that you have within the application gallery, as well as your roles and things like that as well. So if you've got a lot of people doing similar things, you can package stuff up, have it run through this. You can even use the same access packages for internal users as you can with guests. And there are other specific types where we can say that we want to, where are we? Not assignments. We should have prepped this in advance. We want to make sure, in fact, I'll do a new one, that anyone can request this, whether they're in our directory or not. We want to make sure that the path to accessing this information is as easy as possible. So this is where the entitled management API can come in really handy, because if we have trusts set up between different tenants, where there is a level of acceptance that the people within that tenant are trusted to a certain degree to access things within hours, we can say, okay, if we trust these tenants, we can specify them here. It doesn't matter if the user exists in our directory as a guest or not. We want to be able to allow them to request that access package. And again, you can have the approvals or not. But that really breaks down the barriers for collaboration between multi-tenant organizations, where there's applications that everyone might need access to, but are hosted in one specific tenant. Using features like this, all of that overhead of synchronizing users or creating thousands of guest accounts, or even creating internal accounts and having to consume licenses, all of that's taken away with this kind of infrastructure in place. And that's the kind of key. It's to utilize the right type of account to access the right kind of data and consume the right kind of licenses, because we have seen with customers where they've had to create full-fledged internal accounts to access things that they thought they needed them for, which then consumed licenses and like doubled the cost of things. So there's a lot of flexibility and a lot of different use cases that you can use for different personas. And because the combination of this, it works side by side with the inbound provisioning API. And so where you can have multiple endpoints of that, you can then have profiles passed off to the applications that support the guest provisioning. So we've been working with a customer that has all of their user data, guest, contractor, temporary workers, everybody in a single HR system. And so then we've got multiple HR provisioning APIs, all connected to that one HR system, but pulling different data. And then we've got guest, the guest API integration, pulling guest data. So depending on the persona or the role that is defined for them within HR, that specifies which endpoint they hit, and then how they are taken on board with the lifecycle workflows and what permissions they're granted. And that brings me to the end of the demo. So I will pause now for any questions.
Must be a good sign, Matt. Oh, there we go. Martin's raised his hand.
Yeah, I think you are free to speak if you want to come off mute.
Hi there, thanks for that. Perhaps maybe best directed to Chris, because it's maybe goes back to the first part of the session. But any organisation, I guess, looking at the IGA space is naturally going to make some comparisons between Entra IGA and, you know, a SailPoint or a Savient. And I think for the most part, looking at the processes involved in join or move or lever, it matches up quite well. But where I'm struggling to see parity is just around the reporting capabilities, for example. So, you know, if you've went down the Entra route and you've connected up all your applications and systems using ECMA, whatever else you need to do, how can you get that central reporting of fine-grained entitlements that perhaps don't sit in Entra?
Is there anything you want to add on to that, Matt, before I just check a few things myself on that?
No, you go. I'm pondering.
Yes, as I said. So we just checking. Were you looking for the reporting on? So like what's been provisioned?
Well, say for example, I want to so say for example, I want to say, right, give me a view on Matt's entitlements across the estate, either point in time or even historical. But let's start with the easy one. Let's say I want a point in time view of everything that Matt has access to, all his entitlements, and you know it's a large heterogeneous environment. Not everything is single sign-on with Entra. We've got some ADs out there that aren't connected up and syncing. We've got some other applications where fine-grained permissions are in an open LDAP instance or a database. How do I get that central view of somebody's digital identity and all their entitlements?
So from my perspective, we would have from the entitlement packaging, there'll be the reports of what we can put around what resources have been assigned to a user or what access packages have been given to a user, anything along those kind of lines as well. For the third party application side, things that can't necessarily directly integrate into Entra, there will be a degree of provision that we can do via like SQL or something like that as well. So we can provision on-prem from the request. So to say, yes, we give access to legacy application A, whatever you want to call that as well. And that might come via an SQL table to be able to do some a conversion of the data or the user or something like that as well. And we'll be able to pull the reporting from there. And then we'd probably use something like Power BI to then centralize the reporting. Matt, is there anything you want to add on to that side?
Yeah, only the thought that in order for something to be reported on, the data has to be there in some way, shape, or form. So whether it's Entra or Savient or SailPoint, the downstream system has to be connected to that in some way, shape, or form. And so with Entra, because it's a central identity control plane, if you're managing access into those downstream systems through, I don't know, it could be groups that sync over into Shibboleth or into an open LDAP or something like that. If the control for that is within Entra, then you can report on it and you can say, well, person's a member of this group grants access to X, Y, and Z with these permissions, and it kind of breaks out that way.
Yeah, but I guess the main distinction, I think, is that SailPoint, for example, is going to have its own database, isn't it, of these applications and systems, and it's going to do a reconcile with them, so it has its own copy of what's there. Whereas,
and kind of the identity cube thing, yeah.
Yeah, whereas we don't have that with Entra, do we?
So the equivalent to that in the old Microsoft would be the metaverse within MIM, within Microsoft Identity Manager. And the concept of the metaverse doesn't translate to the Entra model, because Entra itself is the repository for all of that information. So the directory is your Entra ID, and your connector space is your applications. Each one of these is essentially the connector space for your downstream application. So if you're using things like you've got Skim and stuff for web apps and modern stuff, if you're using private access, Entra private access to access things that are actually legacy and on-prem and kind of hidden away, you can still control access to that using one of these applications, and that gives you then the visibility and the control of who has what based on what's populated in the Entra portal.
Okay, thanks.
We've got another one.
Andrew, you see you got your hand up as well?
Thanks. Hopefully you can hear me first time this time.
Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah.
So we touched briefly on the joiners, where if we've got requirements for different OUs or different email domains, use a different inbound Skim connector. That's what it kind of looked like, where you step using one set of data but splitting it into two paths into Entra, if that makes sense. But what happens where you've got movers between those two scenarios? Are they going to end up with multiple accounts rather than moving their existing accounts? For example, we might have two OUs, one for HR, one for finance. One might have hr.apexdomain.com and the other one might have finance.apexdomain.com. How would it manage the move between those two?
So within the mappings, which one of these is on-prem? Okay, I don't have an on-prem one, but I can show you the theory behind it. So when you're doing your attribute mappings, you can build in here custom schemas, and so you can then add in. Let's do a new mapping. Let's do an expression, and then we can build our expressions in here in exactly the same way that we would using one of the on-prem technologies, or using a SailPoint or something like that, and hit the target attribute. So in here, you can very, with a lot of detail, very define the granular information you want, and you can use the if clauses and the uniqueness queries and all this kind of stuff in there to use one package. So if it's going to one Active Directory domain, but it's got lots of subdomains in it, you can still use this and just have the logic built in here in the same way that you would the other applications, to say, okay, if it's this, and then that gets picked up in the mover process. When data is submitted, it goes, oh, cool, okay, we're still using this, but now you're going over here.
Perfect. I think that makes sense. Thanks.
Cool. Okay. I think that's a good response. Yeah.
Yeah, I think with these things, I'd like to have a play around and see what I can make it do. But yeah, that certainly makes sense.
So I know Chris mentioned it on his slide before, but the inbound provisioning API is part of Entra Plan 2. So you can just search the store, set up these provisioning, cloud provisioning or on-prem provisioning apps, and just have a play around with it. It's quite simple to get set up with the basics and being able to submit stuff and see stuff happen, and then you can start to drill down into some of the more complex scenarios and things. And of course, give us a shout if you need a hand. Channeling my inner Cameron there.
As if by magic. Do we have any other questions at the moment? We are going to leave some time at the end, but if anyone's got anything, we can take them now. So otherwise,
I'll hang around in the chat then. So if you do have any more questions that pop up, just pop them in there, and we'll pick them up.
Right. Well, thanks, Matt and Chris. Just before we move on, I'd like to very quickly highlight a couple of use cases that I think are relevant to today's conversation. Hopefully we can give you a flavour of the kind of engagements we're commonly deployed on without death by PowerPoint. As I briefly mentioned earlier, a good example of our ability to address highly individual requirements of government and other CNI is the work we've done on a proof of concept for Sellafield and the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority. Condatis were invited in at short notice to create a digital credential to facilitate the high compliance burden faced by employees working across multiple, obviously highly restricted sites. In this case, not only did the credential have to manage professional competencies, certification, role-relevant authorization, but some slightly more unusual factors such as radiological exposure and off-site medical records. Our solution helped to significantly reduce the time and cost associated with onboarding, mitigated costs associated with access changes, cross-career, as well as ensuring that access is entirely revoked at career end. Another good example is our work helping build the snappily titled Employee Access System Replacement, a nice government acronym there for DWP. The EASR is responsible for providing secure access for 28,000 users across 430 local authorities to multiple services within DWP. As such, it must accommodate the continual churn of staff across their user base. The system handles joiners via a complex tiered model whereby local administrators vet and provide physical tokens for their initial onboarding via one-time password. Approvals are handled by a double sign-off 4 eyes process. You can imagine there is frequent movement within the system, including complex cases where a large amount of users operate across several organizations, and also complete organizations can merge and split. For instance, after local council elections, ward changes. Levers are handled and approved within each organization, again via another 4 eyes process. And the system also has to accommodate mass access removal in the event of local authority hacks. All of these solutions needed to meet the challenges of operating without the use of personal mobiles. I realize that's a whistle-stop tour, but as I say, we're keen to keep it sort of all killer, no filler. So if anyone would like to go through those or any of our other use cases, I'd be delighted to go through them in more detail one-to-one. Please pick up with me offline and we can do that. We can arrange a time. Thank you to everyone who's made it this far. Let's now go to the chat and see if we have any remaining questions.
We've had one on here from Connor. It's like, can we have any workflows for a leaver or somebody on garden leave who might still require some level of access, but limited, i.e. remove access from some systems and have access to other systems, etc. I haven't gone into the detail he's put there. Potentially have access to a custom attribute on the accounts to trigger. And yeah, it's exactly what you can do. So you can add a custom attribute, and that might be the trigger. So you can make it time bound if you wanted to, or based on an attribute. It could be manually triggered as well. And then what you would have, this will manually trigger the gardener's leave or whatever else as well, based on department or how many of these workflows you want to have on that, how broad or granular you want to be. And then with that is then set processes and set workflows to say, yeah, that the person on gardener's leave would have access only to these resources or whatever else you actually define. So you can set common flows and common processes to put that in place. So yeah, it can be done triggered or it can be manually triggered, triggered by an attribute or manually triggered.
Right.
Okay.
Anything else?
Yeah, you go. Yeah, so yeah, you got so for the provisioning API to on-prem AD, do you need multiple versions of the enterprise app to send users to different OUs, or would you recommend a post-process user objects from the OU with something like Power Automate Desktop? That is entirely up to you on how you want to automate. You can have as many APIs as you want to have on that for that configuration, and take into account that is for the provisioning and the creation of the user object. So that depends on how you want to provision the users or work with those. So if you've got a separate workflow to do more granular customization, then use something like Power Automate Desktop. If you just wanted to create the user and then other lifecycle workflows come in to create those, to update the user and configure them, then at that point I'd have multiple API endpoints and just have different ways of different different endpoints for creating users in a different way. Okay.
Right. Any more for any more, as they say? Does that look like it for now? If
We get
nothing,
can we get some thumbs up or anything if this has been helpful for people? Have we hit the mark?
oh, we got a question.
Oh, I think that's people hitting react raise rather than react.
Maybe it's a high five rather than a thumbs up. I like it.
Yeah.
I'll take it.
Thank you.
I'll give one last chance if anyone else wants to jump in, but we've had some really great questions there. So thank you to everyone for their engagement. I know it's always a lot more enjoyable for the speakers when we get some interaction. So thank you very much. Hopefully you've all been able to gain some insight from today's session. My contact details are on the screen. So as I mentioned, if anything pops into your mind after this session, or you do want to go through any of those or our other case studies, there's many listed on condatis.com if you're wanting to have a bit of a read afterwards. When I said we're identity geeks, I wasn't joking. We're always happy to hear about difficult and interesting things people are trying to do around identity, specifically with Microsoft Entra. But thank you again to Matt and Chris for your time today. Really appreciate you joining us. My colleagues Lucy and James will be sending the recording of the session out shortly. So yeah, thank you all for coming along, and I hope you have a great week.
Just to chip in one more as well, we've got one more question from Andrew about Microsoft Learning Paths. Yes, there's some excellent stuff on Microsoft Learn around the provisioning agent and some of the lifecycle workflows. What I'll do is I'll stick some of those links on a slide and add it into the deck that gets sent out to everyone, so you can pick them up from there.
Yeah, and as a final point to add, for those who are interested in the identity governance SKU as well, just a pure sales cap on at this point, there is a promotion on it at the moment with some pretty decent discounts on it to the end of June. Yep. So for those who are looking at this, dare I say, now's a good time to buy.
See, I love that, Chris. You're doing my job right at the end there. That's brilliant.
Yeah. So yeah, just pure with sales cap on, but yeah, I'm glad people have enjoyed this. Also, yeah, talk to Condatis if you need some help in really getting this going and that side. You want some help around the licensing and other bits and pieces, talk to your security specialist. So for those most largely across the UK, probably be Vinny for those who are in the devolved territories. But yeah, come talk to us, and we're happy to support where we can.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Chris. And in our role as sort of partners to the UK Entra go-to-market team, we're always happy to come in and give some advice and advisor in that product selection. So don't be shy about reaching out. But if we don't have any other questions, I'm going to end it there. We're all going to get 10 minutes back. Can't say fairer than that. And yeah, thanks again, everyone, for your time. Have a great remainder of the week.